Hey, Neil, a pleasure to have you here on the Simplifying Entrepreneurship podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me, Peter. It's always a pleasure to sit down and chat with you. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. And, taking it back to some times in the past when you used to do some negotiation, and tell us a little bit about where you got started with negotiation, Neil, and we'll get right into some negotiation talk today.
Okay. Well, so I got started with the Ministry of Correctional Services and the Solicitor General. That's a long-winded name, but that's what they were called back in the 80s. And I was a corrections officer at the Wellington Detention Center, which has now been knocked down. And they trained me as a hostage negotiator, and I think it was probably the best skill set that I have ever learned from any occupation, because it transcends every occupation I'm in. If you think about negotiation, you're doing it every day, whether you're negotiating with your kids, you're negotiating with your wife, whether you are a customer or a business person, you're always in negotiation. And if you do it right, you usually come out ahead.
Almost every interaction is some sort of negotiation, isn't it, Neil?
It is, and you have to decide, and that's the biggest lesson I think I can leave with you today. You have to decide what you want. What do you want and what you're willing to give up to get it, if anything, and how important what you want is to you. It's amazing to me how many times I meet business people, and they don't have a plan for negotiating in any situation. They wing it. And most of us do, right? You wing it every day.
Most business owners have never taken any formal training whatsoever on negotiation, even though it's something that we're doing every single day, kind of all day long.
Yeah, and it's simple. It is simple. Once you learn the techniques, it's really simple. You use it in every aspect of your life. And suddenly you start to find out the path is easier. Because so many, particularly business people, are embroiled in conflict. You're in conflict with your bank, you're in conflict with your customers, you're in conflict with your suppliers, and you're in conflict with your employees. And it's all because you are winging it. And that's the key, is to have a plan. And knowledge is king. In fact, negotiation for me is all about knowledge and preparation. If you've got enough information and you've prepared well enough, you're going to get what you want, what you need to get out of it. Because the other side, rarely prepared. Now let me give
that's step one right there, right? Is preparation.
Is the knowledge and the preparation. If it'll shock you, because every hostage negotiation I did, you have to remember I was a corrections officer, so the hostage negotiations I was doing were inside correctional facilities. Yeah. People are already incarcerated and something has happened and they've taken hostages. Well, we're not letting them out. So it's not a possibility. So you're kind of almost set before you go that your goal is don't let them go. They don't get out.
Right.
And so now from here on in, it became easier. But I always had to understand three things in every negotiation. Who the hostage takers are, who the hostages are, and why this happened. And here's the biggest key, particularly when it's conflict. If you're in a conflict with a customer or a staff member and it's out of hand, this is a situation where people start yelling and screaming at you. Mm-hmm. You need to understand one thing. It's not about today. What's going on is not about today, especially if they're that angry. There are other things, if it's an employee, there's other things going on in their life that brought them to this point. If it's a customer, what do you do for a living? What is it you're selling? Me, I had a business. I sold paint, wallpaper, carpet, blinds. There is nothing in that product selection that is worth people screaming and yelling and calling people names. It just isn't.
Yeah.
I've been in the most tense situations where your life is in danger. Those are times where you can get excited.
Right.
Everything else doesn't mean anything. So I always had to say, what else is going on in their life that's brought it to this? What's the mystery?
Would you ask them that? Like, would you just down and out ask them that sort of stuff?
That's a gentle conversation to have. I mean, I can tell you if you want a quick story, but why don't we just get right into it? We're dealing with customers. Mm-hmm. I had a customer come in. I was in the paint and wallpaper industry in the 90s when the wallpaper industry was falling apart. They were in serious trouble. Wallpaper was going out of style. And printing had its issues because we had the advent of the computer, so the printers were having their problems. And so the whole industry was in trouble. And what that did for me as a retailer, my supply chain was not always dependable. And you know, as a retailer, when your supply chain is not dependable, you're in trouble. However, for the most part, we could get what we were after. Sometimes it took some time. So a gentleman comes into my store and he orders 3 borders to go around his daughter's room. Okay? Perfect. 3 borders. Cost of it's about $45. Profit on it is somewhere around $15.
Yep.
If I'm lucky, right? He makes his order. The ladies that worked for me put the order in. They tell him it'll be here in a week. He's happy with that. He picks colors based on the sample. He goes home. He paints the room. The week comes, the night before, we get a fax message that says out of stock, changing the delivery date by a week. So we call him next morning. Don't bother coming in. We just got notification from the supplier. It's going to be another week. Now I'm in a panic because this indicates a pattern to me. And I called him and I warned him that it could go again. And he said, all right, as long as I know ahead of time. Sure enough, it did, but he got the phone call to tell me. And he said, that'll be fine. All of a sudden, on a Saturday morning, with a store full of people, he is screaming at me. And he's telling me, you're not paying your bills. That's why you're not getting wallpaper. Are you in financial trouble? And now you have absolutely ruined my life. Now, it's wallpaper. It can't ruin anybody's life. But how angry he was out of control. And people in the store were getting afraid. Mm-hmm. So I calmly said to him, I understand your frustration. And my goal here is to help with that. So come on back to my office. Oh, what, do you want to get me off the floor so people can't hear me? I said, no, I want you to come and sit down so we can both be in a relaxed environment. But he was absolutely correct. I wanted him off of that floor so that staff and the customers didn't have to hear that. But most of all, I didn't want them to have to hear what he was going to say. Because when we got back into the room, I said, now listen, just use Robert. That's not his real name, but it's Robert.
Yeah.
Really, it's wallpaper. What is going on that you're this irate about wallpaper? Because listen to me. We can pick a new wallpaper that matches the color that it went with. We can fix all that. If I have to, I'll give you a free gallon of paint to repaint the bedroom to match the new wallpaper. Or you can wait for this. But it doesn't call for your actions in the store today. I'm more concerned about what's going on with you. And it took him about 30 seconds. And his whole body language changed, Peter. And he explained to me that he was diagnosed with a disease that he was concerned was going to end his life. And he wanted the wallpaper and he wanted the room done before that happened. Yeah. Now, when you start talking to him, it turns out the disease was diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Well, type 2 diabetes is very common. His whole life was in turmoil because he had to change his diet, he had to change. And so what he was saying today had nothing to do with today. And once I got to that, well, things changed. And I managed to calm him down and I said, look, here's a promise I'll make you. If something happens to you before this wallpaper comes in, when I get it, I will personally wallpaper your room, your daughter's rooms, so they have that memory of you, if you're that concerned. Oh, just that somebody would show that kind of empathy, which is a huge thing in negotiation.
It is.
Empathy is different than sympathy. I didn't feel sorry for him. In fact, I was upset with him because type 2 diabetes runs in my family, and I know, yes, it's a big deal. But no, it does not give you the right to go and start yelling and making accusations at somebody else. But I understood, not being sympathetic but being empathetic, every word I said after that. If I was him and somebody said this to me in his frame of mind, how will I act? And if it was going to escalate it, I didn't say it. Or I found a different way to say it so I could lower the temperature.
Okay.
That's the key. So that's how, it didn't happen today. It had nothing to do with today. It had to do with life. Same with hostage situations in the jail. There was something that happened today that blew the bomb, that blew the lid off it. Mm-hmm. But it was an accumulation of problems for months on end that brought us to here. So having the knowledge about who you're dealing with and what you're going on. See, as soon as I got the knowledge from that gentleman that it was a medical problem, then I can start addressing that. And that solved the wallpaper issue.
Yeah, you're solving the other problem in order to solve the problem that you have, right?
Right. And that's because every problem is attached to an emotion. Every emotion is a reaction to a situation. And if you can't line them up, if that emotion and reaction isn't related to what you've done in your relationship with that individual you're working with, then you have to solve that in order to be able to get what you need. Because negotiation, the number one thing that every business owner should know, before you go into any negotiation, you should have the answer to this question. What do I need? What do I need out of this relationship? Am I negotiating with a supplier? What do I need? You and I know that there's a particular profit margin you have to make as a business owner in order to pay your bills.
For sure.
So you should always know what's the least I'm willing to take in this relationship, what's the pie in the sky, and then anything in between, if I feel comfortable, I can settle for it.
Yeah.
And notice I said feel comfortable. You know, there are negotiators out there who say, negotiate to win, never give in, you know, use these techniques, et cetera, and you'll always get what you want. Okay, I work on a basis of what do I need? And if you really think about it and you're a good person, yeah, I'm in business for one reason and one reason only, and that's to make profit. Because the profit feeds my family.
For sure.
But I'm not here to get rich off of one customer. And I'm not here to get rich off of one supplier. So you have to realize that. What's best for you in the long term? Because if you get your needs crossed, all of a sudden you might short-term gain, but long-term defeat. And you want to be
I love that idea of long term. I mean, that's how I look in my businesses and my dealings. I'm always looking at that long term effect. And, you know, whether it's with my team, with my clients, or with my suppliers, it's always about the long term repercussions. And how, you know, in your experiences, Neil, how have you worked some of those deals out where maybe you take a little bit less now and a little bit more later, or a little bit more now and a little bit less later? Like, how have those worked out in your negotiations over the years?
Yeah, fairly well. And here's the big thing. It's a full disclosure. I owned a Collier World Paint and Wallpaper store. Franchisees and franchisors, it's a clash, and you have to understand who's in it for what.
Yeah.
And it was a learning curve for me to understand that we're not a team. We're not a team. The major franchisor is in it for their shareholders and themselves, and they'll help you to a certain extent. But when push comes to shove, they're about the money. It's not a team effort at that stage. So I lost that business in 2008 when the economy crashed, and there just wasn't enough meat left on the bone for me, and it took me too long to realize that.
Right.
But here's the big kicker. Clearly, I did things right with my customers, because that was 2008. This is 2022, and I got a phone call this past weekend where somebody was finally moving out of the house that I had helped them, you know, wallpaper. I had helped them put the flooring in, put the shutters in. Said, Neil, we bought a new place. How much would you charge me to come over and give me advice on what to put in? And you know what? I was thrilled that a customer, after all those years, and you know, would still reach out personally. So I said, you know what? Grab some coffee. I'd love to do it again. And I went over and I helped them. But people call me all the time over that stuff. So I did it right with my customers.
Right.
Not perfect. There were still customers that weren't happy from time to time, and that's because that's where, if you're going to get conflict in a business, that's where it's going to come.
For sure.
Is with the customers. But here's the other thing. I made sure all my staff, when I closed that down, I knew what they needed because I had the knowledge. I knew them intimately. In a small enough business, you know who your staff are. So when you're negotiating salaries with them, I know what they need. I know what I need. And now we're both walking a path to make sure we can get it together. Now, sometimes that would say, I know what you need. I can't get you there in this first step. But I promise you, if you stay with me, I can get you there in 3 or 4 years. Yeah. And yeah, you might be able to get more money at this place right now. But if you stay with me, you're going to have a better opportunity in the end. And we're going to have fun. Because we're a small group, and those ladies that worked for me, Peter, we're all still good friends. 3 of them ended up at a different store altogether, and I walk in there and they go, "Come on and spend some time with us. It'd be like old times." And they don't hesitate to call and ask questions.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's about taking the time to understand what they needed, what I needed, and make it a journey. It's a long-term game. You can always get short-term gain, but it won't serve you in the end.
Yeah. I think that's a great spot to tag our comments here today. We've already come to, sort of the limits of our time. And you know what, Neil, I think we should maybe recap and do one of these again down the road.
I would
hopefully,
love to.
if you're into that. I love talking
yeah.
about negotiation. It's such an integral part of what we do. Like you said earlier, everything in life is a negotiation, and going through all of that stuff, whether it's for business or for personal or whatever, we're always in negotiations. And, Neil, I'd like, if possible here, could you tell everybody how to get a hold of you if they want to learn more about Neil Dunsmore and what you do?
Sure. My website is neildunsmore.com.
That's easy.
Email. If they want to reach out to me and talk about conflict or have me speak to their organization, Neil Dunsmore at neildunsmore.com is the email address. If you can remember my name, you can find me. And my job is to try and make myself memorable.
That's great, Neil. Well, I really appreciate your time here today. Enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure our listeners will too. And thanks for coming out here and joining us on the Simplifying Entrepreneurship podcast.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
Right on. We'll talk soon.
Looking forward to it.
Okay.